I'll now introduce our keynote speaker. A native of Northwest Ohio, Jamie attended the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, and subsequently served 20 years in the United States Marine Corps as a naval aviator flying attack helicopters. Deploying for Operation Desert Storm Kuwait, Operation Restore Hope Somalia, Operation Uphold Democracy Haiti, and twice to Operation Iraqi Freedom Iraq, Jamie flew 117 combat missions and was recognized for valor in combat multiple times. He received the Purple Heart for wounds received in action in Fallujah, Iraq, in April of 2004. In his non-operational tours include an instructor pilot at the prestigious Marine Aviation Weapons and Tactics Squadron 1, the Marine Corps' Top Gun school, 2 tours in the Pentagon, and a highly competitive congressional fellowship where he was assigned to the United States House of Representatives for 18 months and co-authored 13 federal appropriations bills and other legislation. Following retirement, Jamie was sought after and hired for several high-profile jobs as a vice president with Cassidy and Associates, the oldest lobbying firm in Washington, D.C., then a vice president for L3 Harris Technologies, then L3 Communications, and was also the chief business architect for Textron, a special CEO-directed program which attained phenomenal success by designing, manufacturing, assembling, and testing and flying new class of aircraft in less than 24 months. 2015, Jamie commenced his role as a turnaround CEO at a failing human services nonprofit organization. With his vision and leadership, he expanded the mission of the organization to encompass mental health care, utilizing trauma-informed care, veterans retreats focusing on peer support and art therapy, financial assistance, physical wellness and nutrition, and support of the homeless. Completing his master's degrees in business administration program at the University of Texas at San Antonio in 2019, Jamie assumed the role of president and chief executive officer of United Way of Northern New York on June 17th of 2019. He's married to the former Jacqueline Carter, a 25-year retired U.S. Secret Service agent. They have 3 beautiful children, Jake, Danica, and Jessica. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to our 25th Memorial Day keynote speaker, retired Lieutenant Colonel James L. Cox, United States Marine Corps.
Good morning. Senator Tedesco, distinguished guests and visitors, Mr. Meehan, Mr. Lamb, the Saratoga National Cemetery Support Committee, the Honor Guard, veterans, family members of veterans, and friends. I'm truly honored to be here with you today. We are here to celebrate the men and women who put their lives down as a sacrifice for our nation so that we could be free. My wife and I drove up here on Thursday, and as we came up on the thruway and then turned north to head up towards Saratoga, every mile we drove, there were more and more American flags. They were flying from houses and barns and fence posts and heavy construction equipment. We started to reach the soul of our nation. This is home. The history of the Saratoga, given by Second Class Petty Officer Gaspy, and then the ringing of the bell by Lieutenant Phelps and Engineman First Class Logan, is a perfect start to my short comments. The Saratoga's bell, as you go out the front gate, stands ready to call out to the sailors, Marines, soldiers, airmen, and Coast Guardsmen who rest in this hallowed ground. Ernest Hemingway's "For Whom the Bell Tolls" gently reminds us that the tolling of the church bells will eventually ring for all of us. But today, they ring as a call to action. a call for remembrance. Over the past few months, I've gained a greater understanding of the men and women who call this holy ground home, but also the families who live around here. In 1945, Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz said, "Among the men who served on Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue." The more I spoke to different people who lived here, one word repeatedly kept surfacing. And that word is uncommon. Our nation's heartland, which extends from upstate New York, western PA, Ohio, Iowa, Indiana, Kentucky, and Texas, just to name a few, has produced men and women of uncommon character, integrity, and tenacity. I'm not sure whether these traits are living in a small town, the work ethic, values instilled by parents, or the friendships that are forged in mud and sandboxes. Our heartland has and continues to provide uncommon men and women who have answered the calling. They have marched toward the sound of the cannons when every other human instinct is to run from the sound. The Heartland residents still believe in duty, honor, and country. Private Oliver Barrett, a member of the 10th Massachusetts Regiment, rests over here in section M1, site 139. He died during the Battle of Bremen Redoubt on October 7th, 1777. Barrett was a cooper by trade and drafted into the Continental Army previously in the year. He survived the First Battle of Saratoga, only to fall during the Second Battle of Saratoga. In a time when the average lifespan of a man in our country was 35 years old, Oliver Barrett gave his life at 51 years old. He left behind his wife Anne and 7 children. When the Saratoga's bell rings, it rings for this uncommon soldier during a time of great uncertainty in the birth of our nation. Technician 5th grade Henry E. Leavitt, United States Army, is found in section 12 over here, site 592. Henry served in Europe during the war, and on April 29, 1945, he was part of the 20th Armored Division that liberated the concentration camp at Dachau. After the war, Henry married his sweetheart, Irma, and during their 77 years of marriage, they had 4 children, Judy, John, Sally, and Susan, 7 grandchildren, and 9 great-grandchildren. They had a farm down in Rensselaer County, but Henry was just one of many to serve the country. You see, Henry J. Leavitt, who resides in section 3, site 182, was his father, a World War I pilot who was shot down on June 1st, 1918. Following Henry was his son John, who I spoke to several weeks ago, just to learn about his father. But I found out that John, too, wore a uniform in the United States Army, serving in the 38th Scout Dog Platoon in Vietnam from 1966 to 67. But the family lineage does not stop there. See, John had 2 daughters. Both of them served in the United States Army. Daughter Heather retired as the Chief Warrant Officer 4 this past March. And his daughter Brooke is a Master Sergeant in the United States Army. Henry didn't talk much to his son about his experiences during World War II. But when you look at the DNA in that bloodline, the Levitt family is no stranger to the ringing of the Saratoga's bell. Section 9, Site 132, is home to Corporal Clifford Johnson, born on October 22nd, 1930, and he grew up in Valencia. He entered the U.S. Army in 1949, and he was part of the 57th Artillery Battalion, 31st Regimental Combat Team that deployed to Korea in 1950. On September 22nd, 1950, over 250,000 Chinese soldiers crossed the Yalu River. We were caught by surprise. Clifford and his regiment were surrounded by 120,000 Chinese troops over on the east side of the Chosin Reservoir, very rugged terrain. They finally broke out of their encirclement on December 1st, but unfortunately, he fell on December 5th, first being listed as missing in action, but then changed over to killed in action on December 5th, 1950. There were 1,777 men in the 31st Regimental Combat Team. 385 survived. When Clifford passed away, he was only 20 years old. But Clifford's family, in and amongst all of you here, there were 9 siblings, including Clifford. 8 of the children wore the uniform of the United States. His brother Nate was killed in North Africa in 1943. Siblings Larry, Martin, and Gloriana served in World War II. His brother Malcolm, in the post-war years, was in the Army's 82nd Airborne. And finally, the baby of the family, Norman, served in Vietnam, where he was wounded on November 28, 1967. Like the Levitts, the Johnson family has heard the bell. If you're starting to recognize a theme, it's very common up here. The other night, my wife and I were over at VFW Post 420 for a couple beers. And when you talk to the members there, it's a continuation of the stories of brothers, of sisters, of fathers and aunts and uncles who have served. Section 9 holds 2 individuals of uncommon courage who answered the Saratoga's bell many, many times in their young lives. 2 adjacent sites permanently bond 2 soldiers, 2 aviator co-pilots, 2 friends. Both of them tragically lost their lives on March 8th of this year. In Site 125 rests Casey Nicole Frankowski. Next to her, in Site 214, is Chief Warrant Officer 2, John Michael Gracia. These 2 amazing individuals represent what is best in this community and our nation. Within the walls of this cemetery, they are the latest example we have of what genuine heroes are. Casey Frankowski was born on April 11th, 1995 to Jim and Jill Frankowski, who are sitting over here out in the audience to my right. When I had the pleasure and the honor of speaking to her father several weeks ago, I asked him, Chief, what was so special? What's the most special thing about your daughter? When you think of the all-American kid, Casey Frankowski was that girl. spirit had no boundaries. She infused joy into everything she did and everyone she touched. She was a cop's kid, a daughter, a sister, a granddaughter, an aunt, niece, best friend, and girlfriend. She was also a scout, cheerleader, camp counselor, softball player, and bowler. But it just wasn't her physical presence that made the room come to a stop. It was the joyful energy that she brought into that room. She's quick to laugh and smile. She embraced love, faith, and family. Casey was the person who quietly befriended a transfer student into her high school in her senior year. And as we all can imagine, if you're a transfer your senior year of high school where you know nobody, there was Casey as a friend guiding her through a new school and a new set of friends. Casey could provide comfort to a friend, laugh out loud, cast a line into the water, or hold the collective and the cyclic of a Black Hawk with ease. Jill, she was the daughter every father and mother want. She's America's daughter. Casey also had a little bit of daredevil in her. And it was foreshadowed by a girl who ran around on her jet ski. So it was no surprise she ended up training and flying Black Hawk helicopters. She volunteered with the Best Luther Fire Department. There's a definition of courage that I think sums her up, and I'll quote: "The ability and strength to do what is difficult, especially in the face of uncertainty, and inner resolution to go forth and face obstacles." Casey stood out amongst her peers not just because of her professionalism, but just as importantly, she espoused some of the greatest traits a human being can have: empathy, integrity, joyousness, perseverance, and bravery. Casey Nicole Frankowski is an uncommon beacon of light in the darkest of nights that reflect off the Saratoga's bell. John Michael Gracia was born on December 6, 1993, to Mike and Judith Gracia. And speaking with his dad, I had to laugh because the way he described his son was the youngest in the family with a wild streak that went after life in full throttle. How can you not love a kid like that? During the journey that Mike shared with me, both in our discussion several weeks ago and then this morning at J. Michael's gravesite, it became evident that Jay was just not a United States soldier and a New York State trooper. He was a superhero. We all know or have read about this man who wore 2 uniforms and the stack of personal awards that he had. But it's the other side of Jay that I want to talk about that his father shared with me. J. Michael was the life of the party, the friend who picks you up when you're down, the man who would give you the shirt off of his back. J. Michael soaked in everything around him and brought the best of it back to his family and friends. His passion for serving nation, state, and community had no boundaries. He worked for the New York State of Homeland Security, swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, and he promised to serve, protect, and defend the people of New York. Jay didn't have time to be Clark Kent. He was too busy being Superman. One of the last stories that Mike shared with me told me exactly the kind of kid that J. Michael was. It reminded me of the young pilots that I hung out with when I was a new aviator. See, J. Michael deployed to Kuwait to work on Blackhawks. And he learned this fine art of turning grapes into wine. Now, if you're not familiar with the military or served overseas, general order number one always tends to be, thou shalt not drink when in foreign lands. But this devious young man found a way to take grapes out of the chow hall and turn it into wine. For the rule followers out there, you would have called it a cardinal sin. But to me, this irreverent attitude, contagious to all around him, is what made him the best fighter, the best son, the best trooper, the best colleague, and the best friend. Jay was the man who fought to protect the weak, to carry the damsel in distress out of the burning building, and to hand you the coldest beer. He was an uncommon man in a much too drab world. But his chopper's searchlight and the flashing lights off of his trooper vehicle reflect every night off Sister Sarah's bell. Casey Nicole and John Michael are legends. They sought the difficult path and pursued it with vigor. They feared nothing. You know, it's so uncommon these days. I can look to my right and I see men of great courage, human beings who raised their hand, stood in yellow footprints, and did what their nation asked for them. That's not common anymore. The Nightingale song specifically called to Casey and Jay. They remain uncommon for their ideals, patriotism, and courage. These amazing Americans, the remarkable men and women of the heartland, are present not just in spirit today, but in all of you gathered. The heartland gave, and you continue to give the best to our country. And this is in a nation and a world that is void of integrity, truth, leadership, and empathy. It's easy for most of us just to fade into the dark forest. But you only have to walk these grounds or take in the company of the veterans here today to understand there's hope. A hope that is born of uncommon men and women in Mechanicsville, Boston Spa, DeFreeseville, and throughout the Mohawk Valley. Hope that exists because extraordinary Americans answered the USS Saratoga's bell when she rang. To Oliver, Clifford, Casey, and Jay, and all the veterans and family members here today, thank you for answering the call. Thank you for giving yourselves to the common good, where life in our country has become more about self and immediate gratification. You are all uncommon heroes. Many people don't know someone to memorialize or celebrate on Memorial Day. It often fades back into the barbecues, softball games, and laughter. But on Monday, take a moment. I'd ask that you research and say the name of a veteran who was killed in action. Lift that person up. Navy Senior Chief Cryptologic Technician Shannon Kent was killed on January 16th, 2019. She was from Pine Plains, New York, where her father works as a commander in the state police. She was assigned to Cryptological Warfare Activity 66 and spoke 5 languages. She died in Syria when she was 35 years old. Shannon left behind her husband, Joe, and 2 children, Joshua and Colton. Ladies and gentlemen, to walk these grounds, to stand amongst giants, I am in awe. It is overwhelming to be standing here in front of all of you. God bless you all, and God bless the United States of America.